The massive chamber stretched out like a crystal cathedral, its walls made of some alien material that seemed to sing with power. 3 creatures sat at the center, and everyone else in the room was scared of them. These weren't just any aliens. These were the galaxy's biggest bullies, the ones who had been pushing everyone around for thousands of years. Commander Vexthul looked like he was made of living glass. His body shifted and changed shape as he sat there, and waves of mental energy rolled off him like heat from a fire. When he thought something, everyone in the room could feel it pressing against their minds. The Vexhari were mind readers and mind controllers, and they loved making other species do whatever they wanted. Across from him sat Queen Thrakenessa, and she was nothing like the glass creature. She looked like a giant bug, with huge compound eyes that reflected the room's light like a million tiny mirrors. But the scary part wasn't how she looked. It was knowing that she was connected to billions and billions of other bug creatures across the galaxy. When she thought something, her entire species thought it too. They moved like one giant organism, and they ate everything in their path. Between these 2 monsters floated something even stranger. Zephyr Kale wasn't really solid at all. He was made of pure energy, flickering in and out of reality like a ghost. His people, the Zephyrians, could jump into other creatures' bodies and take them over completely. They were like invisible parasites that could steal your entire life. These 3 species had divided up the galaxy between them like it was a piece of cake. Everyone else was just food, slaves, or entertainment. If you were lucky, they ignored you. If you were unlucky, well, nobody talked about what happened to unlucky species anymore. A small, shaking creature stepped forward. Counselor Retmark barely came up to the knee of the nearest guard, and his voice cracked when he spoke. His people were one of the lesser species, the ones who got to live only because the big 3 hadn't gotten around to wiping them out yet. Great ones, he said, his words coming out in nervous bursts. Something strange is happening in the Outer Rim territories. 17 whole star systems have gone completely silent. No communications, no ship traffic, nothing at all. The 3 apex predators looked at him like he was an annoying insect. Commander Vexthul's mental laughter hit everyone in the room like a wave of cold water. It wasn't a nice laugh. It was the kind of laugh a cat makes when it's playing with a mouse. These little creatures always make things sound worse than they are. Vexthul's thoughts echoed in everyone's heads. Probably just some minor technical problems, or maybe they finally learned to keep their mouths shut and stop bothering their betters. But Queen Thrakenessa wasn't laughing. Her antennae, which looked like long, thin whips on top of her head, were twitching back and forth. She had a direct connection to every single one of her children across the galaxy, and lately, some of them had been acting very strange. 3 of her most important colony worlds had stopped responding to her mental commands. That should have been impossible. Her species didn't work that way. They were all connected, all part of one big family mind. Individual thoughts weren't supposed to exist. But right before those worlds went silent, she had heard something that chilled her to the core. Her drones had been thinking for themselves. It was like hearing your own hand suddenly start talking to you. Wrong, unnatural, terrifying. Zephyr Kyle flickered more rapidly, his energy form becoming unstable. Something has been interfering with our possession attempts in those regions, he admitted reluctantly. Our scouts report resistance, mental barriers we cannot penetrate. The room fell completely silent. These 3 species had been the galaxy's apex predators for millions of years. They had crushed every rebellion, absorbed every threat, destroyed every challenge to their power. The idea that something out there might actually be fighting back successfully was almost impossible to believe. But the evidence was mounting. Ships were disappearing, colonies were going dark, and strangest of all, the few survivors who made. It backtold stories that made no sense. They spoke of creatures that fought like the Thraknul, but thought like individuals, of minds that couldn't be read or controlled by the Vexhari, of beings that somehow trapped Zephyrian possession attempts. Send investigation fleets, Queen Thrakenessa commanded, her mental voice reaching out to her swarms across the galaxy. Find out what dares to challenge us. But deep down, all 3 of them felt something they hadn't experienced in millions of years. It was small, just a tiny, cold spot in the back of their minds, but it was growing. For the first time since they had conquered the galaxy, The apex predators were beginning to feel afraid. Captain Lee Jun-ho pressed his back against the cold crystal wall, feeling its strange vibrations through his armor. The Vexhari fortress was like nothing on Earth. Everything was made of this weird living crystal that hummed with psychic energy. Most species would have been driven insane just being here, their minds overwhelmed by the constant mental pressure. But humans were different. His squad of 12 moved through the alien corridors like ghosts. They had trained for years for this moment, learning to work together without making a sound. The Vexhari had built their entire defense system around one simple idea. Any enemy that got close would be paralyzed by their mind control powers. They would freeze up like deer in headlights, then get captured or killed. The problem was human minds didn't work the way the aliens expected. Lee Jun-ho's thoughts were a mess of random memories, half-finished songs, worry about his sister, back on Earth, and tactical calculations all jumbled together. To a Vexhari trying to read his mind, it was like trying to grab smoke. Every time they thought they had a grip on his thoughts, something else would pop up. Maybe his grandmother's recipe for kimchi, or the time he fell off his bike as a kid. "Snipers ready," came the whisper in his earpiece. Sergeant Park Min-soo was 2 floors up with the long-range team. The man could hit a coin from half a kilometer away, and right now he was aimed at the most important target in the building, the big psychic amplifier that boosted all the Vexhari's mental powers. The aliens thought their crystal technology was so advanced that primitive humans could never figure it out. They were wrong. Humans had been studying captured Vexhari equipment for 30 years, taking it apart piece by piece, learning how it worked. They knew exactly where to hit, to make the whole system come crashing down. Meanwhile, on the other side of the planet, Lieutenant Kim Da-hyun was leading her team through what could only be described as a nightmare. The Thraknul breeding chambers were like a horror movie come to life. Rows and rows of egg sacs, each one containing a new warrior drone that would be born already connected to the hive mind. The insect aliens had never faced an enemy like humans before. Every other species they had fought either worked alone, making them easy to swarm, or they worked together through some kind of technological connection that could be jammed or destroyed. But humans were something else entirely. Kim Da-hyun's soldiers moved like they were one organism, but it wasn't because of any technology or mental link. They had trained together, fought together, and trusted each other completely. When she raised her hand, they all stopped without her saying a word. When she pointed left, half the team went that way automatically. It looked like the Thraknul's hive mind, but it was actually something much more dangerous. It was choice. "Package is in place," she whispered into her comm. The package was something the Thraknul had never seen before, a mimetic weapon, not a bomb or a bullet, but an idea, a dangerous idea that would spread through their hive mind like a virus. The concept was simple but devastating. What if you could choose for yourself? It was something humans took for granted, but for a species that had never had individual thoughts, it was like poison. The idea would jump from drone to drone through their mental connection, and each one that heard it would start to wonder, start to question, start to think for themselves. High above the planet, Commander Choi Hee-jin watched her screens with satisfaction. The Zephyrian energy beings had made their move, just like the humans had predicted they would. The ghostly aliens had tried to possess her crew members, slipping into their minds like invisible parasites. But human consciousness turned out to be a trap. When a Zephyrian entered a human mind, they expected to find something organized and logical, like the minds of every other species they had ever possessed. Instead, they found chaos. Human minds were full of contradictions, memories that didn't make sense, emotions tied to random thoughts, and dreams mixed up with reality. One Zephyrian had tried to possess Corporal Yoon Jae-sung and gotten lost in his memories of playing video games as a kid. The alien couldn't tell the difference between Jae-sung's real experiences and the fictional worlds he had explored in games. Another had entered the mind of Medic Kang Hee-won and become trapped in her recurring dream about flying, unable to distinguish between the dream and reality. 3 entities contained, Choi Hye-jin reported with a slight smile. The Zephyrians were now stuck in what her scientists called psionic loops, endlessly cycling through human memories and experiences they couldn't understand or escape from. All across the galaxy, similar operations were taking place. Humans had been preparing for this day for decades, ever since they first encountered the three apex predator species. While the aliens saw them as just another primitive race to be conquered, humans had been watching, learning, and planning. They studied how the Vexhari's crystal technology worked and found ways to disrupt it. They analyzed the Thraknul's hive mind structure and created weapons designed to tear it apart from the inside. They researched Zephyrian possession techniques and trained their minds to be impossible to control. The galaxy's apex predators had ruled for millions of years because they were specialized. Each species had one incredibly powerful ability that let them dominate everyone else. But specialization also meant weakness. They had become so focused on their one strength that they never learned to adapt. Humans were different. They were generalists, good at many things instead of being perfect at one thing. They could think individually but work as a team. They could be logical but also creative. They could be peaceful but also absolutely ruthless when they needed to be. As the three operations concluded successfully, a message went out on encrypted human channels across the galaxy. Phase 1 complete. The apex predators are not as untouchable as they thought. Time to show them what happens when the prey starts hunting back. The galaxy was about to change forever, and the former rulers were about to learn what it felt like to be afraid. Admiral Shin Woo-jin stood at the center of his ship's bridge, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched the sensor displays. Outside the reinforced windows, space looked peaceful, just stars scattered across the darkness like diamonds on black velvet. But those sensors told a different story. They showed the largest war fleet the galaxy had ever seen approaching his position. For the first time in galactic history, the three apex predator species were working together. The crystal ships of the Vexhari glowed with psychic energy, their surfaces pulsing with colors that hurt to look at directly. The bioships of the Thraknul looked like giant insects floating through space, their hulls covered in what looked like scales but were actually living armor. And scattered throughout the formation, the Zephyrian vessels flickered in and out of reality, sometimes solid, sometimes just energy patterns dancing between dimensions. "Sir," called out Lieutenant Commander Park Jimin from the communications station. "They're broadcasting on all frequencies. They want us to surrender." Admiral Shin almost smiled. "What exactly are they offering?" "Complete subjugation, sir. They say they'll let 10% of humanity live as slaves if we give up now." Captain Yun Sora, his second-in-command, shook her head. "Generous of them," she said dryly. Sora had been with Shin for 15 years, ever since the early days. When humans first started exploring beyond their own solar system, she had seen firsthand what these apex predators did to species that surrendered. "They still don't get it," Shin murmured, watching the alien fleet arrange itself in what they probably thought was an intimidating formation. "Look at them. 3 species that have conquered thousands of worlds, that have wiped out entire civilizations, and they think we're just another species to be dominated." The truth was, humans had been studying these aliens for decades, not just their technology or their military tactics, but the way they thought. The Vexhari believed that mental power was everything. If you could control minds, you could control the universe. The Thraknul thought that unity was strength. One mind controlling billions of bodies was the perfect form of life. The Zephyrians saw physical form as a weakness. Being pure energy made them superior to all flesh and blood creatures. Each species was so convinced of their own superiority that they couldn't imagine losing to what they saw as primitive apes with basic technology. "Here they come," announced Tactical Officer Kim Dong-hyun. "Vexhari ships are powering up their psionic arrays." The first attack hit like a tsunami of mental pressure. The Vexhari had gathered their most powerful psionics, creatures who could crush the minds of entire planets. They sent out a wave of mental energy designed to paralyze every human in the fleet, turning them into helpless vegetables floating in space. But human minds didn't work the way the Vexhari expected. Where other species had organized predictable thought patterns, humans had chaos. Admiral Shin's mind was simultaneously thinking about battle tactics, worrying about his daughter's college exams back on Earth, remembering a joke his grandfather used to tell, and calculating supply logistics. To a Vex Hari trying to take control, it was like trying to grab a handful of water. The psychic attack hit the human fleet and just bounced off. Worse than that, the chaotic nature of human thoughts created feedback through the Vex Hari's own psychic network. Several of their command ships started spinning out of control as their commanders were driven mad by the incomprehensible mess of human consciousness. Phase 1 failed, Captain Yoon observed with satisfaction. Their turn, Thraknul. The insect. Ships opened their bellies and released clouds of what looked like glittering dust into space. But it wasn't dust. It was engineered viruses, biological weapons designed to eat through metal, plastic, and flesh. These were the same bioweapons that had consumed entire star systems, turning planets into lifeless rocks. The virus clouds spread toward the human fleet like a deadly fog. Any normal ship would have been dissolved in minutes, crew and all, but the humans had been preparing for this exact attack for 30 years. Nanite defenses active, reported Chief Engineer Hong Min-ki. Adaptive countermeasures deploying. The human ships were protected by swarms of microscopic robots that could analyze and adapt to any biological threat in real time. As the Thraknul viruses hit the nanite clouds, the tiny robots immediately began rewriting the viral code, turning the weapons against their creators. The modified viruses spread back toward the Thraknul ships, and suddenly the aliens found their own bioweapons eating through their living hulls. Several insect ships began falling apart as their organic armor was consumed from the inside out. 2 down, Captain Yoon muttered. Zephyrians are up. The energy beings made their move last, phasing through the hulls of human ships like they weren't even there. Physical barriers meant nothing to creatures made of pure energy. They slipped into the human vessels, seeking out crew members to possess and control. But when the Zephyrians tried to enter human minds, they found something they had never encountered before. Human consciousness was like a maze with no exit. The aliens could get in, but they couldn't get out. They found themselves trapped in memories that shifted and changed, emotions that didn't follow logical patterns, and thoughts that contradicted themselves. One Zephyrian tried to possess Commander Lee Sung-min and got stuck in his memory of watching a movie that made him cry, laugh, and feel angry all at the same time. The energy being couldn't understand how one experience could produce contradictory emotions, and it became trapped trying to process the paradox. Now, Admiral Shin said quietly, it was the moment they had all been waiting for. The human fleet suddenly scattered in all directions, but not randomly. Every ship knew exactly where to go. Every captain knew exactly what to do. They moved like a flock of birds, each one making individual decisions that somehow created perfect coordination. This was something the apex predators had never seen before. Other species either fought as individuals or as a collective, but never both at the same time. The Vex Hari commanded through mental domination, the Thraknul through hive programming, and the Zephyrians through possession. They all required rigid hierarchies to function. But humans had learned to be both independent and unified by choice. Every captain could make their own decisions, but they all trusted each other completely. They could split up and fight alone, or come together as one, and they could switch between the two in an instant. The alien formation, designed around the idea of centralized command, fell apart completely. When the human ship scattered, the apex predators didn't know who to chase. When they tried to reform their battle lines, the humans had already regrouped somewhere else. Look at their formations, Captain Yoon said, pointing at the tactical display. They're panicking. They've never fought an enemy that wouldn't stay still and follow the rules. For the first time in millions of years, the galaxy's apex predators were learning what it felt like to be hunted. Their weapons were useless, their tactics were failing, and their enemy was doing things they couldn't predict or counter. "Sir," called out Communications Officer Baek So-young, "we're getting panicked transmissions from all 3 fleets. They're trying to retreat." Admiral Shin watched as the mighty alliance of apex predators broke apart, each species fleeing in a different direction. These were the creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia, and now they were running away from a species they had considered primitive. Fear, Captain Yoon observed, watching the enemy retreat on the tactical display. They're feeling it for the first time, and in that moment, the balance of power in the galaxy shifted forever. The hunters had become the hunted, and humanity had announced to the universe that there were new apex predators in town. Far from any star system, in the cold emptiness between galaxies, 3 massive ships hung motionless in space. For the first time in over 1 million years, the 3 apex predator species were meeting together as equals, not as conquerors dividing up territory, but as desperate survivors trying to figure out how their perfect world had fallen apart. The meeting chamber was a marvel of technology, part crystal cathedral, part organic hive, part energy field. Each species had contributed their most advanced science to create a space where they could all exist comfortably, but comfort was the last thing on anyone's mind. Queen Thrak-Nessa's massive form dominated one section of the chamber, her compound, eyes reflecting thousands of holographic displays that showed the galaxy's current state. Each image told the same terrible story. Human forces weren't just winning battles, they were completely changing how warfare worked. "Look at this," she said, her mental voice carrying undertones of disbelief. One of the displays showed a recent battle where humans had defeated a Thraknal swarm that outnumbered them 1,000 to 1. "They don't fight like any species we've ever encountered. They don't follow any of the standard patterns." Commander Vexthul's crystalline body pulsed with frustrated energy. The Vexhari had built their entire civilization around the idea that superior mental power meant automatic victory. Their psychic abilities had crushed every rebellion, dominated every enemy, controlled every threat. Until now. "It has to be some kind of trick," he insisted, his thoughts rippling through the chamber like waves. "They're primitives. They still use metal bullets and chemical explosives. Their ships are powered by controlled explosions. How can creatures this backward defeat us?" But even as he said it, the evidence was right there in front of them. Human tactical analysis filled the displays. Detailed studies of Vexahari crystal technology, complete biological profiles of Thraknal warriors, energy patterns of Zephyrian possession techniques. The humans hadn't just been fighting them, they had been studying them like laboratory specimens. For decades, Queen Thrak-Nessa admitted, the truth bitter in her mental voice. "They've been watching us fight other species, analyzing our tactics, figuring out our weaknesses. Every battle we've won has been teaching them how to defeat us." Zephyr Kyle flickered more rapidly than usual, his energy form struggling to maintain coherence. The Zephyrians had always prided themselves on being beyond physical limitations. They were pure consciousness, able to slip into any mind, possess any body, control any enemy. But human minds had turned out to be traps that caught his people, like flies in a web. "Their minds are chaos," he said, his voice like static electricity. "But it's not random chaos, it's controlled chaos. They can think in contradictions and paradoxes that our logic can't process. Where we seek perfection and order, they embrace mess and adaptation." The displays shifted to show something even more disturbing. Humans weren't just defeating the apex predators' armies. They were doing something far more dangerous. They were talking to the slave species. For millions of years, the 3 apex predators had kept control by making sure the lesser species never worked together. Fear kept them isolated, weak, easy to manage. But humans were changing that. In system after system, they were teaching former slaves how to fight, how to think strategically, how to believe they could win. "They're not just warriors," Queen Thrak-Nessa realized, her antennae twitching with growing alarm. "They're teachers, liberators. They're turning our prey into predators." One display showed a human instructor working with a group of rabbit-like aliens that had been Thraknal food stock for centuries. The creatures were learning to use human weapons, human tactics, human ways of thinking. Another showed humans helping a crystalline species develop mental shields against Vexhari psychic attacks. A third displayed energy-based life forms learning to resist Zephyrian possession attempts. "This is impossible," Commander Vexthul's thoughts crackled with denial. "These species are naturally inferior. They're supposed to be prey, they can't become predators. But the evidence said otherwise. Across the galaxy, species that had been victims for millennia were suddenly fighting back and winning. They had human advisors, human weapons, human hope. And, most terrifying of all, they were starting to work together. Zephyrkale's form solidified as understanding hit him like a physical blow. "They're pack hunters," he said, "but not like any pack hunters we've ever seen. Most predators hunt in small groups, a few dozen at most. But humans, their pack includes every species they encounter." The truth was spreading through the chamber like a virus of realization. Humans didn't see other species the way the apex predators did. Where the Vexhari saw minds to control, the Thraknol saw bodies to consume, and the Zephyrians saw vessels to possess. Humans saw something completely different. They saw potential allies. "Look at their history," Queen Thraknessa said, pulling up data files the humans probably didn't even know they had shared. On their own planet, they had hundreds of different tribes, nations, cultures. They spent thousands of years fighting each other. But when they finally united, they became unstoppable. The displays showed human history, wars and conflicts, yes, but also cooperation on a scale that amazed the apex predators. Humans had learned to work with creatures as different from them as cats and dogs and horses. They had figured out how to make peace between enemies, how to build alliances between rivals, how to find common ground where none seemed to exist. They don't just adapt to their environment, Commander Vexthul said slowly, his crystalline form dimming with the weight of understanding. They adapt their environment to them, and that includes other species. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place as they watched recordings of human diplomats meeting with former slave species. The humans weren't conquering these aliens, they were convincing them. They were showing them that life could be different, that they didn't have to live in fear, that working together made everyone stronger. 50 years, Zephyrkale said, his energy form flickering with something that might have been despair. In 50 years, they've undone millions of years of our work. They've turned our victims into allies, our weapons into weaknesses, our strengths into liabilities. The three apex predators looked at each other across the chamber, seeing their own fear reflected in alien faces. For the first time in their species' histories, they were the ones being hunted. They were the ones running away. They were the ones who didn't understand how the universe worked anymore. And somewhere out there in the galaxy, human fleets were still advancing, still liberating worlds, still teaching former slaves to think of themselves as equals. The humans weren't just winning a war. They were rewriting the rules of civilization itself. The age of apex predators was ending, and none of them knew how to stop it. The center of the galaxy was a place of wonder and terror. Massive stars burned like blue-white diamonds, their light so intense it could blind anyone who looked directly at them. Black holes twisted space itself into impossible shapes, creating gravity wells that could trap entire solar systems. It was here, in this cosmic arena of unimaginable power, that the fate of the galaxy would be decided. General Nam Tai-hyun stood on the bridge of the flagship Harmony, watching the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history take formation around him. But these weren't just human ships. Mixed in with the sleek vessels of Earth were the crystal fighters of the Altarians, the bioships of the Centaurians, and the energy constructs of the Belters. Species that had been slaves for millions of years were now flying alongside their liberators. "Sir, enemy fleet is powering up," reported Colonel Han Ji-woo, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were facing. "Long-range sensors show psionic amplifiers the size of moons, bioweapons that could consume entire star systems, and energy disruptors that can tear holes in reality itself." General Nam nodded, his weathered face showing no emotion. He had been preparing for this moment for 30 years, ever since humanity first encountered the apex predators. "They've even managed to wake up the Void Dwellers," he observed, watching the sensor readings. "I didn't think they were desperate enough to ally with something that hungry." The Void Dwellers were things that lived in the empty spaces between galaxies, ancient creatures that fed on life itself. They had been sleeping for millions of years, but the apex predators had somehow convinced them to join this final battle. It was a move born of pure desperation. They still don't understand, General Nam said quietly. They think this is about winning a war. They think if they can just destroy us, everything will go back to the way it was. But the humans knew better. This wasn't about military victory. It was about something much more fundamental. It was about whether the galaxy would continue to be ruled by fear and domination, or whether it would evolve into something better. The battle began with a wave of psychic energy so powerful it made stars flicker. The combined psionic might of the Vexhari, amplified by technology that turned their thoughts into weapons, crashed against the human fleet like a tsunami of pure mental force. It should have turned every human brain to mush in seconds. Instead, it scattered harmlessly against minds that had learned to think in chaos. The humans had spent decades training their thoughts to be unpredictable, contradictory, and impossible to control. Where other species had organized minds that could be dominated, humans had learned to embrace the beautiful mess of consciousness. The Thraknul followed with bioweapons that could evolve and adapt faster than any defense. Viruses that could eat through metal, bacteria that could dissolve energy shields, living acids that could consume anything they touched. These weapons had destroyed countless civilizations, but the humans had brought allies who understood biological warfare in ways the Thraknul never expected. The Centaurians had been the insects' favorite prey for centuries, and they had learned to fight back. They released counteragents that turned the bioweapons against themselves, creating a cascade of biological destruction that swept back through the Thraknul fleet. The Zephyrians made their move next, sending waves of energy, beings to possess the crews of the Allied ships. But they found themselves facing not just human minds, but the consciousness of dozens of different species, each one thinking in ways the energy parasites couldn't comprehend. All former slave species are reporting successful resistance, announced Captain Bei Su-min from the communications station. The Altarians' crystal minds are reflecting the possession attempts back at the Zephyrians. The Belters are using their energy manipulation to trap the attackers in feedback loops. General Nam allowed himself a small smile. This was humanity's true weapon, not their technology or their tactics, but their ability to see potential where others saw only weakness. Every species the apex predators had oppressed had developed unique ways to survive, and now those survival skills were being turned into weapons. The battle raged for 3 days and nights, with weapons being used that could crack planets in half. The Void Dwellers devoured entire sections of space, creating holes in reality itself. The Vexhari unleashed psionic storms that made nearby stars go nova. The Thraknul released clouds of living metal that consumed everything in their path. But for every weapon the apex predators used, the Alliance had an answer. The humans had studied their enemies for decades, learning not just how to fight them, but how to think like them. Every tactic the aliens tried had been anticipated. Every weapon they deployed had been countered. "Sir," reported Tactical Officer Kim Min-jun, "the enemy formation is breaking apart. The Void Dwellers are starting to feed on their own allies. The Zephyrians are retreating into higher dimensions. The Vexhari command ships are going dark." "And the Thraknul?" General Nam asked. "Their hive minds are fragmenting. Too many individual thoughts breaking through, they're losing coherence." The apex predators had made a fatal error. They had specialized for so long, become so perfect at their one thing, that they couldn't adapt when faced with an enemy that embodied adaptability itself. Humans were generalists by nature, good at many things instead of perfect at one thing, and they had taught their allies to be the same way. As the alien fleets burned around them, General Nam opened a communication channel to the surviving apex predator commanders. His voice echoed across all frequencies, calm and steady despite the carnage surrounding them. "This is General Nam Tae-hyun of the Human Alliance Fleet," he said. "We offer terms. Surrender now and adapt to a new galaxy, one where cooperation replaces domination, where former prey species have voices in their own fate, where strength comes from diversity rather than specialization." The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Then, slowly, the weapons fire from the alien ships began to cease. One by one, the apex predators stopped fighting. "We," came Queen Thraknessa's mental voice, weak and broken. "We surrender." "Commander," Vexthul's crystalline form flickered with defeat. "The age of apex predators is over," he admitted. Zephyr Kyle's energy signature was barely detectable. "We yield to the new order." General Nam nodded to his communications officer. "Send the ceasefire order to all ships. Begin rescue operations for enemy survivors." As the Alliance fleet moved to help their former enemies, something extraordinary happened. Species that had been slaves for millions of years were now offering aid to their former oppressors. It was mercy on a scale the galaxy had never seen before. But far away in the darkness between galaxies, something ancient and patient stirred. It had been watching this conflict with great interest, studying these new apex predators called humans. It had seen how they turned enemies into allies, how they found strength in diversity, how they changed the very nature of power itself. And it was learning. The entity had been asleep for billions of years, waiting for the galaxy to evolve something worthy of its attention. The old apex predators had been too simple, too predictable. But these humans, they were different. They were complex, adaptable, dangerous in ways that excited the ancient consciousness. As the humans celebrated their victory and began the long work of rebuilding galactic civilization, the entity began to move. It would take time to cross the void between galaxies, but it had all the time in the universe. And when it arrived, it would test these humans to see if they truly were the new apex predators, or if they were just another species waiting to be replaced. The humans had taught the galaxy an important lesson about apex predators. Eventually, something bigger always comes along. The only question was whether that something would be humanity's ally, or their replacement. The galaxy held its breath and waited to find out.